Tasmania is the full stop at the bottom of the world, and we live on an island of stories. For years now, the Tamar Valley Writers Festival has celebrated our great thinkers, writers and readers, and now we're excited to share these insights globally. I'm Lyndon Rigol, and throughout this series, my colleague Annie Warburton and I will be talking to writers, playwrights, comedians, poets, editors, and all of those who share a love of the written word, right here on the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast. In today's episode, we tackle the final taboo, our own mortality. I talk to two of our most engaging experts on death and the practical questions of what might lie beyond it. Dr. Terry J. Hannan is an experienced physician who has worked for more than 45 years in direct patient care and has 12 years experience in palliative care. A staunch proponent of the necessity for medical professionals to listen to their patients and treat their dis-ease along with their disease, Dr. Hannan's collection Bedside Stories chronicles some of these interactions and the lessons he has learned about life and death from his own patients. Ian Norton has an impressive CV that covers his work as an alderman and as a scientific officer at the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery. Now a professional snake handler, Ian is an expert in the preservation of cadaveric material, though over time his insight into this field has taken on a deeply personal significance. I talked to both of them in a dynamic discussion about the stories of our own lives, including what we should do when the final sentence is being written and what happens after the last page is turned. Terry and Ian, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Terry, I might start with you, and I'd like to talk a little bit about your book, Bedside Stories. Can you tell me what brought about the idea of writing this and why you wanted to collect these stories?
Yes, it actually occurred in an opportune time. My wife was attending her 90-plus-year-old mother in the Cook Islands, and I can't stand the sun and the surf anymore, and I had 3 days to occupy myself. And then I just recalled that I had all these stories, and I just wrote it in 2 weeks. And I had the stories because they were so meaningful for me over 45 years.
So can you tell me, obviously you were a palliative care physician, what was the meaning that came about through these stories?
The important thing is the emphasis on palliative care, but in fact, I'm a general physician and I see all illnesses. So the idea that palliative care was the kind of sheer focus because we all suffer in health with pain, loss, dying, fear of death and all those. And somehow these stories just stood out because of their exceptional nature. And yet every person I see is exceptional.
Mm. Do you think there is a thread that runs through all of them?
I suppose the thread is not the content, but why have they held these stories until this physician came along and asked a question?
Yes.
And one of the things I'm learning about writing is the use of words, and the story about the mother who lost her son. It was one word in a medical consultation that opened up the story that healed her. So I think the current social healthcare, social interaction environment has lost the ability to effectively listen to a person, like it's over a coffee table or this conversation here today. And it's amazing what human beings will tell you.
Mm. This story that you're talking about, I think, is really fascinating. I wonder if you could share it for us, the story of the mother.
Well, just briefly, because I have a specialty in electronic health, so I do electronic records and that. And I think I was telling you, we built a program for 40 million people with AIDS in Africa. So this lady in her 60s had now 4 admissions in 6 months for the same condition and had several before. But more importantly, on the day I saw her, because of how she was admitted, she'd had 4 medical emergency calls from intensive care in 45 minutes. And they all said she was normal. And there she was lying in a bed, and her husband was just sitting there solid like a soldier. And I was explaining to her that none of the tests had found anything, and I just said, "Do you have any stress?" Thinking that was the right word. And she said, "No." And then I said, I was about to leave. I turned around and said, "Do you worry about anything?" And that's when the story evolved about her son being assaulted to near death, went to jail. The assailant came to his house on a sunny day, and the boy went in, grabbed a knife and murdered the guy who almost murdered him. And now the mother can't see her son because he can't afford to live in any community where he's known. Yeah. And the woman stood up and said to her husband, "It's all over, let's go home." Like, how can that not affect you as a human being, not just as a doctor? I mean, the responses of the medical student, the nurses, yeah, because that's what it's all about. It's not just the person in the bed. There are people all around them, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that there's a profound effect that you can have as a physician just by bringing those stories out of people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's, again, there's your words. Am I bringing it out of them, or did I just unlock the door? They're the ones who bring it out because they've been not telling anybody else, have they? So, what was it that I just said? In that case, it was just one word. And she felt safe enough in a 4-bedded ward with a medical team, nurses, no privacy, to release this story. I mean, how can it not affect you as a human being?
Absolutely. Ian, we might pass to you. So we're moving from the human kingdom to the animal kingdom now. I wonder, you've worked a lot in preservation, and I wonder if there's anything that we can learn from your experiences there.
I guess when you're spending a lot of time with dead things, you become a bit distant from death. So from a purely professional aspect, that indifference can transfer to people's perception of being non-empathetic. Like I can have a conversation with someone that's facing imminent death through illness and relate to them without sobbing up or feeling uncomfortable. And I guess that's part of the legacy of what I've grown up with, is being in a household where death was embraced, talked about, exhibited in the house. When grandfathers died, we laid out our own and kissing goodnight each time. Those sorts of things prep you for a life of, when you're dealing, you don't get sentimental to the point of, you care, but you don't have that sentimentality that sometimes shows. I break out in tears at the discussion about, people that have died in our family. So it has had a pretty broad impact on the building of Ian, if you like.
Yeah. Now, I know that all of this came quite close to you with your friend Richard. I'm wondering if you could tell us that story and what you learned from that.
Well, it didn't start with him. It started with my sister. She died of emphysema, and we knew it was coming, but when it did come, it was a bit of a surprise. And the family, which is spread all over Australia, flew down. They were poor as church mice, had no real money, no idea what to do, and strangers or distant friends were taking things in their hand and trying to help them out as best they could. And of course I said to them, we don't really need to go down this road of appointing a funeral director, and let's do it ourselves as a family. What do you think? Oh, can we do that? Yes, of course you can. It's all we've got to do is fill out forms and we can do this. So I had the experience of going through her situation and her preparation for cremation, working out all the legalities of it, accessing a casket, and then of course laying out your sister. And it became a family. Like, oh, Mum didn't put that sort of makeup. She had her hair a bit like this. And so we were arranging it, and they said to me, look, she looks like gravity's pulled her face down. And I said, well, we can fix that. I'm a taxidermist. Let's make her look like she did. Let's make her look like she's sleeping. And I've discovered, after I made the discovery, that with rigour, if you get hold of the face and you massage it, you can bring all that that expression back into the face. You can get those little wrinkles in the mouth and the smiley wrinkles near the eyes. A little bit of rouge here, a little bit of rouge there. We'll say we put glasses on her. Yeah, we'll put some glasses on her. And she loved that string of pearls. Okay, we'll put the string of pearls on her. And so we dressed her in a favourite dress, and we laid her out, and we manipulated her face and thought, now she's asleep. But before that, this is the bit that really turned me around. Now, when we lose someone and you go through all the process, your first inclination is, well, you know, you've got to start preparing for the funeral. You go to maybe an undertaker, and the undertaker says, well, these are the options, what we have here. Now, a basic funeral will cost this, this and this. Now, look, we've got these beautiful caskets here. Now, the budget price one, you know, $600, but you probably out of respect, you'd want something a little bit better for your loved one. So, look, this for an extra $200 or $300, you can have this one with gold handles, and etc. So, went through all this, and in the end, they came back and told the family $7,500 as a budget funeral for your recently departed mother. When I went to pick up my sister from the funeral director, she said, oh, what's prompted you to do this? And I said, well, family can't afford it. She said, oh, are they struggling? I said, yes. I said, $7,500 is far, far too much. I said, oh, look, if we'd have known that, we could have done it for $3,500. That's what triggered my sudden shift. And I thought, well, if you can do it for $3,500, I'll do it for under $1,000. And we did. So that prompted it. So when my friend, he'd already spoken to me about not wanting a funeral service. I said, you don't want people there sobbing over my coffin. And he said, all I want is a whiz-bang party and all my friends gathering and, you know, and have a beer on me and all this sort of stuff. I said, okay, so no service? And he said, no service, I just don't want it. I said, well, what about then? You're not going to be here. Why don't you, what if I bring you around a digital recorder and we'll put it on a stand and you can video yourself. I'll show you, you only got to press a button and then switch it off. You video yourself and tell us all about your life and your family and what your aims and aspirations, and perhaps a little message for your grandkids and all that sort of stuff. So we did that over 3 sessions till finally we got what we wanted. And he said at the time that was just a great thing, being able to talk to people about, you know, what his hopes were and tell them a bit about his history, etc. So when he did die, I took him home to my place, and we tended to his needs and changed into the clothes that his wife said he'd like to have his last trip in. So dressed him, tarted him up, put him in the passage because we had to go out that night to a party. And then when I got home, put him in the back of the car, thought we'll race him off tomorrow to the crematorium, get all that out of the road, and then we'll have the slap-up do on Saturday, which is pretty well how it went. But there was a whole lot of procedure that we hadn't reckoned on that had us doing a fine dance. But in the end, it worked out. He was cremated, and the total cost, apart from a doctor verifying his death, the total cost was $500. I thought that's a big drop down from even the $3,500. So that's probably the thing. DIY funerals. There must be loads of people in this situation, and why can't communities start to take care of the deceased? You know, they live in their communities. A place like Libidale, a good example. Everyone knows everyone. Someone goes, why don't we do our own taking care of business, if you like?
May I make comment 2 points?
Of course.
For this whole of this conversation, Ian has talked about death, not passing away. Passing is a transitory phenomenon. So the beauty is he's actually not taken death out of the language, which is what society has done. And the whole process of his friend and his sister is allowing death to be part of normal life. And I had a similar experience as a student. Two of my colleagues were killed in a car accident, and one was Russian Orthodox and one was Greek Orthodox. And they lay in open casks at the funeral. So this little conversation to me should be recorded because he's not talked about passing away at all.
Well, do you think that we need to change the way that we talk about these kinds of subjects? Yeah,
absolutely.
What would you like to see changing?
Well, I'd like to see us look at it as part of the journey that we take through life. It's just full stop at the end of the sentence, really. I see it, when my mum and dad died, I said to Sylvia, our turn on the conveyor belt. We're the next generation, we get up and we go on the conveyor belt. And I think maybe it's more like a train. We go to the destination, but some people get off at a station before they get to their destination. So that's what life is. It's just a journey from our birth to the grave. Take the mystery out of it, celebrate the life, and don't dwell on the death. Everyone's going to be sad. Sure, you're sad. They're not going to be around to share times, good times, and have arguments with and all that sort of stuff. But it is still part of a journey, and we need not to fear it. It's something that everyone will address at some time in their life. And if you're going to make it memorable, then celebrate it. Don't commiserate so much. Put more emphasis on the person and who they were and their impact on your lives. And I think if you have a more wholesome view, it helps the passing, or should say the dying. When you drop off the twig, then you've at least, the head hits the pillar for the last time, you can say, I did it my way and I feel comfortable, I'm ready to go.
The question is beautiful because this was written about in the Jewish concentration camps by Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist. And he talks about the meaning of death. And death affirms our finiteness and our uniqueness. So death is essential to our uniqueness, which Ian said also, but that was in 1946.
You must see this fear of discussing this and this fear of death a lot, Terry. How do you approach that as a physician?
Several aspects. I think my recent graduates over the last couple of years are not taught this ability. And at times the patient is dying and people can't confront it because I say to them, who's got the biggest problem here? It's not the patient, they know they're dying. It's those around the side of the bed. And I've had situations where I've been talking to a patient about death and the whole 8 of the team have disappeared because who am I talking about? Not about the patient, they know where they're going. So it's a learnt process, but if you have a person your age or 23 or 25, not even married or just graduated from university and doesn't want to do the wrong thing, and then you have a patient dying in front of you, how are you going to react? Excuse me. Yeah, how are you going to react? And I think that's part of the educational process. That's where the technology has seduced us away from the patient, which is what happened with the lady in the bed, of course. But it's a learned process. But through my training and people in my area, you were taught to talk to the patient, yes.
I certainly, from my own perspective, have no intention of going into a nursing home. My biggest fear in life is not of dying. It's probably the method. I don't want to go. Ideally, I could just like to go to bed one night and not wake up in the morning. That would be just bee's knees. But the chances of that happening, well, you know, as you get old and you start to get all those little aches and pains and you wonder. So my feelings are that as if it was, say, a disease such as MND, motor neuron disease, definitely having spent some time with friends and relatives that have died from that disease, I certainly wouldn't want to have the undignified passing that accompanies that disease. Having a choice is all that really matters. if things get too unbearable, having a choice to me seems a good escape plan. But it's not mandatory that I would accept. I think freedom of choice, it's my body, my life, and the very fact that suicide's now has been taken off the crimes list, you're not going to be locked up or incarcerated because you attempted suicide, or you might be put in under mental care for having those tendencies. But as far as the legality goes, no one's going to be prosecuted, but you can be prosecuted for assisting. Now, just having voluntary euthanasia on the books, as far as I'm concerned, is enough. Whether you use it or whether you don't, it's sort of a bit like in case of emergency break glass, that sort of thing.
And Terry, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's the ethical legal process that assisted dying is not right. With the long years of experience and how care is delivered, it's important to see that dying is not an individual person's entity. We all carry people with us. We go in now more often into a profession that is seduced by the technology, and you've got to do a test, it'll hopefully find another test, all right? So all these people are involved. And then there's the final thing as human beings, and I think Ian partially addressed this. There's the concept of letting go. It's the living left behind. And even to that last breath, there's emotional resolution and growth in the interaction, okay? So added to that problem, we know that from Australian research, 57% of people receive appropriate care, which means 43% receive inappropriate care, and 30% have unnecessary tests and procedures. So at the end of life, how significant is that? And we now know, so if we take, the other statistic is that only 1 in 3 cancer patients have pain, but they can have up to 6 different kinds of pain. And all can be managed effectively to assist the journey to the end and allow the process. But the other point is we now have all these cognitively impaired or demented people in nursing homes without any clear-cut instructions of what to do at their end of life. So what is happening is that the nursing homes under stress have these elderly people who would normally die of pneumonia, infection or other processes, have an event, are transported to the emergency block road, given an MRI, CT, blood tests, antibiotics, etc., because the family want everything done. So how confusing can that be? And that's what we need to clarify. We need to clarify the family, the patient, before they lose capacity, the family to decide what they want for them, and then the medical profession, how to handle this kind of patient. They should be allowed to die if the disease is not curable or the outcome is no better or even worse than where they were before. So that's how I see it. And when you apply that individually, the answers fall into place.
Mm. Do either of you have any thoughts? You've talked, both of you, about the change of culture and the change of culture technologically and bureaucratically and commercially around death and dying. What changes would you like to see to the way that we approach this subject?
Change has to occur. I'll just start with a little quote about the technology. One of my French professors, famous in e-health technology, said in Canada, his greatest fear was that the physicians and the technologists of the future will become so seduced by the technology they'll forget about the patient. And guess what's happened, okay? So health professions are educated on the use of technology, and it is very seductive. So we've got to look at how to change all that, because the story about the mother whose son murdered, all the answers were there, but nobody stopped to listen to the patient, all right? But then the biggest problem is, how do we get the concept of death, dying and loss presented to us in the media? Ian?
I guess from my point of view, if I look back on the old days where it was people used to cope with it in a more formal environment, I look at it now as we know more. We live in a secular society. It needs to be part of a normal landscape. It needs to be something that perhaps you can plan your send-off. I watched a doco the other day on a funeral home, and where some lady spent gazillions on a lavish funeral, and she planned it right down to even the clothes that the funeral director would wear. And I thought to myself, and she seemed to enjoy it. I thought it was probably not the sort of thing I'd like to go and spend my last dollar on. But she seemed to embrace the fact that there was a terminal end to her story. Her journey is over and she's going to die very soon. And she wanted to have a good death, and she wanted her friends to be part of the celebration of the life that she lived. That's fine. And I think if we can, I would plan my own funeral as much as say, well, look, in fact, I already have. So DIY, taking your finality in hand and looking at it as part of the journey that you've had is, I guess, you really got to make people sit and think, well, hang on, do I need to really have this send-off? Can't I just get out of this life easy? Do we need to have all this formal closure? I'd really much rather have my friends gathering around the bar and drinking to a good life than maybe a full-on church service. But in saying that, for those in the community that have beliefs, and that might be part of the process, but you can still do it, and you can still eulogise, and you can have words spoken at the graveside and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't have to be something to fear, and it doesn't have to be something that's going to break the bank. What Terry's saying makes a lot of sense. It's not dying in fear, not formalising things to any great degree, and preparedness leading up to the event so that your wishes are known, that your directives, look, I don't, stop feeding me if I have another stroke and things get bad, I don't want all this nonsense. And having that validated.
So for me, as an older person, I think there's wisdom in your question and wisdom in his response. If we believe that we should change and reaffirm the normality of death and dying in society, how do we as a social group, where instant gratification is the focal point of everything, going to change this natural event across the whole of society, from the patient to the professor of medicine to the nursing staff to the community? And it's not just death and dying, it's so much else. Is instant gratification, instant self-satisfaction, and trying to avoid pain and suffering, which are essential to human existence. If you have an operation on a knee and you're a young person, the pain and discomfort, this is totally foreign to your life, but suddenly my life is completely changed, but I've been brought up on instant gratification.
Terry, one of my favourite writers, Neil Gaiman, wrote a list one day of things that school doesn't teach you. And one of them that was really heartbreaking in the list was that he said, school doesn't teach you what to say to someone who is dying. And I think if anyone can answer that question, it's probably you. What sort of questions and conversations should we be having?
Again, your wisdom comes through. So I will use the example of what we call medical history taking. You come to me with a problem, right? And I construct mine as if I met you as a person in a coffee shop. And within 90 seconds or 120 seconds, I can find out who your parents are, your children are, your handicaps, your drugs, your surgery, etc. But the person telling the story realises they're being listened to. So if we can reaffirm the value of across-the-table coffee conversation or a cup of tea conversation, that says to the person telling the story, wow, this person is interested in me. For me, there's a professional component that I can tell whether the person can remember their name, their age, their sex, their medications, etc. But the person telling the story says, wow, this person is interested in what I do.
Ian, it sounds like you've got some really interesting perspectives on some of the ways in which we actually overemphasise death on the other end of it, as we deal with funerals and things like that. What do you see as the way forward in terms of how funerals and memorials could change and be different from the way that they are?
Well, the first thing is the conversation you have with the person that's about to drop off the twig. And when I have that conversation, we talk openly as if we're talking about what we're going to do after work, or what plants you're planting in your garden. It's open, and we just talk about it now. It's light-hearted, and we make it part of a fun journey. This is the next big adventure of your life. Let's make it grand. So I guess that's part and parcel of the change. Starts with that, and the rest of it we can make great leaps and bounds in the way we inter people. For instance, the idea of a pod and planting a tree in a natural burial with a QR code that tells the story of your life and shows you all your family pictures, etc. All those sorts of things. No casket, a shroud, whatever. Reuse your casket. Maybe you'll have this lovely sarcophagus. We could make one really easy, like an Egyptian sarcophagus that lifts off and exposes the body that you're just going to put down a metre in the ground and throw a bit of dirt over and plant this wonderful tree. We grow a forest, and that person's just made the best contribution. They're the compost. So what more could you ask for? And that's just how we need to be looking at it. Make it the passing. Yes, all right, it's the end of your life. You're not going to see your grandkids anymore and all that, but it was inevitable. So let's make the most of it and make it as easy as we can, enjoyable as we can, and make it a celebration of who we are.
I think this, for me, has been a very complimentary conversation, because Ian's just reactivated. When people are approaching death, there is stress and anxiety, but the thing to remember, humans do not develop new anxiety or stress coping patterns. They have an exacerbation of how they handle stress in their life. So if there's been family conflict, divorce, inheritance, loss of a child, all these things are exacerbated, and that's what affects the dying process. And one of the pains is severe emotional pain. And so if you eliminate that and not allow to share for those left behind, we now have generations of mentally ill people.
Well, I suppose that leads me to what will perhaps be my final question, which is that both of you have expressed really beautifully a different perspective on death and dying, but how comfortable are you with your own mortality and with these questions for you personally?
I'll answer very quickly, because when I go to the bedside, I'm the person with the biggest problem talking about death, and if I can't talk about death, I can't help the person in front of me. Yes, I've had a couple of experiences that have been very severely critical to the formation of my personality, where death was quite significant and potentially violent, but I think probably affected how I saw my life. But if I can't talk to myself about it, I can't talk to others.
Well, for me, it's part of the normality of my life and my wife is we both aren't sentimental about dying. We're quite comfortable with it. And I always said years and years ago, I said, if I feel that things are going to get bad, or I'm, given some directive that my life is about to end imminently because I've got terminal cancer, I said, what I'd like to do, there's a lovely mountain in the outback of New South Wales. If I could go and sit on the mountain with my swag and just die, no food, no water, just lay when you said 48 hours in a conversation, yes, when you cease nourishment, it doesn't take very long for you to go. I thought that would be ideal, where you want to be. And besides, by the time they get to you, you've probably fed half a dozen good eagles. So that'd be even better. So I had a near-death experience from a snake bite, where I spent several hours in the twilight zone. And at that point in my life, I lost the fear of death. That just vanished. I thought, this is all you can deal with me. Bring it on. It's not the death, it's the manner. You know, you just want to, like I say, you just want to go to bed one night and not wake up. That'd be perfect, but it doesn't always work out that way.
Beautiful. Well, I hope that this conversation sparks more conversation out in the community as people watch this and start to talk about it. But for now, thank you for joining me and thank you for joining the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast.
And thank you.
Thank you.
The Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast series is sponsored by Events Tasmania, M Visuals and the award-winning Turner Steelhouse Distillery at Grindelwald, home of 3 Cuts Gin, the perfect accompaniment to a night of reading. For more information on any books mentioned in this program, please visit Petrarch's, Launceston's major bookshop and a wonderful supporter of the Tamar Valley Writers Festival.